Bam.
Hi, I'm Donelle Dadigan, and you're watching the Break It Down Show.
This is so easy. I love, we cover a lot of ground on the show here to know. We have a lot of Harlan's guests come on the show. What's crazy about Harlan, I'll talk about Harlan for a second here, is he represents estates, and we have all these incredible people, your godfather being one that we're going to talk about today, and these folks that have these legacies, that we often know about. I've had Gene Kelly's wife on, Patricia, has been on the show, and you realize like the work that still continues to keep Gene relevant, to protect his legacy. And you have this work that you do with the museum and now with your godfather and the release and the Grammy nominations this year. It's incredible. And then the next thing you know, in about 2 hours, I'm going to talk about Ukraine. I mean, we cover a lot of
We
ground
shouldn't be
here.
laughing, but
But
it's amazing.
before we talk about Ukraine, yeah, I want to talk about this work that you're doing right now, talking about this incredible body of music. We've covered a lot of ground in music here, right? We've had the most recorded drummer in history. We've had, look, our musicians have sold 1.7 billion records, right?
Amazing.
But your godfather is the first guy to really explode the record sales game. Like he is it. He is the first one.
Well, I appreciate you saying that. I have to be honest, my godfather was the first musician to sell a million copies of a record. And I think, we would have all thought that, it was Elvis Presley or the Beatles, who had that distinguished situation of selling a million copies of a record, but it was my godfather, Jose Iturbi, playing on the piano Chopin's Military Polonaise. So, it was a great. I mean, I think about it. I know my godfather was very excited about it, but not recognizing that the posterity that it would bring and the tens and hundreds of millions of people since the 1960s when he first got his star until today that have walked on the sidewalk on Hollywood Boulevard and stopped and seen his Walk of Fame star.
I got kicked off my own show.
Well, that's the best, Pete.
I live under the flight path in John Wayne, and so sometimes when an airplane goes over, Wi-Fi goes out for whatever reason. So I apologize. Um, you were talking about your godfather and how he sold the first million. He thought, sometimes it's Elvis, and then I lost track of it. And I think that's the ghost of Elvis saying, "Hey, don't lose track of me. We haven't lost track of you, Elvis. We appreciate you."
Well,
Um,
it's an interesting thing because when I was once upon a time when I started my career, it could very well be Elvis. I used to teach piano lessons, and I used to be a school teacher and taught music appreciation. And one of my favorite little students was Lisa Marie Presley. So maybe it was Elvis who came in.
yeah, or Lisa Marie, I guess now, right? Like it's there's there's just this whole other world that we don't know about, and Wi-Fi, we're so dependent upon it. So apologies for everybody. I've got the door open as wide as possible. Hopefully we won't have any more glitches today. This 16 volumes, right, and some of the most iconic songs ever are in this collection. It's mind-blowing. I was going through the songs and I'm like, know it, know it, know it, know it, know it. It's just it's endless, this body of work.
Well, I'm so glad that you said this. Actually, they're from the RCA vaults from the 1930s through 1940s. And what's exciting for me is that it is my godfather, Jose Iturbi, who is performing. He's performing solo piano. He's performing sometimes with his sister Amparo Iturbi, who was a phenomenal pianist, a concert pianist in her own right, and my first piano teacher. And also, he is playing with orchestra, sometimes conducting the orchestra, sometimes conducting the orchestra and solo piano in a piano concerto. And of course, then there's some fabulous songs that he conducted for some of the films that he did in Hollywood in the late 40s.
When you guys go to sit down to market something and you're going to release it, obviously for the Grammys and everything, and you pitch 16 CD set, what are the looks in the room? Do people go, "What are you talking about, 16 CD set?" How does that pitch meeting go?
Well, I have to back up and tell you, this is really a very unique set. It's a collector's edition. And these recordings have never been heard before. But
Hmm.
additionally, is a 180-page book that comes with it. Oh,
Right.
and I have it right here.
Yeah,
It's a little blurred,
there it is. Yeah.
but
I'm
we're
going to
so
get a better
thrilled
picture
with
of it.
it.
I'm going to get it. I'll put it up for everybody. You
We're
keep
so
going.
thrilled with it because it's Michael Feinstein, yes, the famous Michael Feinstein, who penned the essay. He's quite a wordsmith, very knowledgeable, and we have developed a great friendship. And then the Jose Iturbi Foundation provided the photographs and everything for the book, and so it's been a great partnership with Sony Classical, Michael Feinstein, and the Jose Iturbi Foundation. And everyone, their heart is in the right place. It's a passion project for all of us. And I have to say, for all of your listeners and viewers, Michael Feinstein really brought this to make it so wonderful as it is. His words in the essay, he really studied my godfather before he wrote the essay.
How did you get Michael to agree to do this? I mean, he is in a position where he doesn't have to do anything he doesn't want to do. So, how did this come about?
Do you really want to know?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, yeah, for sure. Yeah.
Well, actually, it was Michael Feinstein who called me,
Oh, no kidding.
yes, and told me about what he had in mind. And then he mentioned several people who we knew in common. And it took us a couple years to put it together, but it was well worth it. And I'm so thrilled. I've developed a great relationship and friendship with Michael Feinstein as a result. But God bless him, because I don't know if it was anyone else that I would have paid attention to the conversation.
Why is that, though? I mean, there's a lot of great writers that could have done it justice. Is it because it was his idea, or what puts it in such elite and specific company?
Well, I think it's that we know that he is a great performer. He is a pianist. He could understand my godfather on several of those different levels, being a pianist, being a performer, and being successful. My godfather, he was kind of like, a rock star for his time, way ahead of what we know of rock stars today.
Sure.
And Michael Feinstein has a great following. And so I kind of thought, they can understand each other, and I think
Hmm.
my godfather would have been pleased.
When you think about Michael Feinstein and his ability to play, and then your Godfather's ability to play, do they have similar tone? Do they have similar look? The piano's so physical, right? Like, if you watch Emmanuel Axe play, he's got a certain style, and you watch there's all kinds of feminine artists or female artists, but they still have their own style and sounds and how they bring their personal physique to the music. Do you feel like these guys are akin when they play?
Not really.
Okay.
And it's interesting you mentioned that because, my godfather crossed over from classical to popular. He accompanied many of the greats of his day, Frank Sinatra, Judy Garland, and they were all friends and they all lived very close to each other.
Mm.
Gene Kelly, I mean, all these people. And when I was little, I would be at my godfather's house and I would know, so and so as Uncle so and so if they came over often, or I met a new person and his name would have been Mr. So and so. And usually it was, a great conductor, another performer, or an actor.
Mm.
someone that Jose met because he did so many MGM films. And in fact, I just heard from the daughter of Jane Powell yesterday. And
No
Jane
kidding.
Powell and my godfather had been in several MGM musicals together. So the world is very small, Pete, and so
Yeah. Yeah. Well, we just had another Harlan client. We had Rosemarie's daughter on Noopy,
yes, yes.
and yeah, you guys all know each other. We were talking off mic, and we were talking about how she got through Hollywood childhood and was okay, and so many other kids didn't. And then she was like, I had a strict upbringing, and I'm like, by all accounts, Bing Crosby was a great dad. Three totally different outcomes with this kid. She's like, oh, I knew, and she knew all of them, and she had all these crazy stories. You guys really all do know each other, and it's such a weird thing because your parents or you yourselves, your peers are all varying levels of famous and notable, and you do see the pitfalls and those that get too close to the sun and those that completely avoid it. What is the common denominator? How do you get through it all and maintain, whether you go to become famous, kind of famous, famous adjacent, what's the common denominator to get through this stuff sanely and safely?
Well, I mean, I can only speak for myself. I had a very wonderful upbringing. My mother was my best friend until she passed, and I still chat with her daily. I still ask her
Mm,
opinion. And my father, he was a great dad. Sadly, he left us too young when I was in my teens and was very ill for many years before. But my godfather, Jose Iturbi, he stepped in and told my mother, don't you worry, I will take care of Donelle. And believe it or not, I got lessons, Pete, that were so fabulous. I mean, you
yeah.
could never get them from school or college or a textbook, but I had lessons in life from Jose Iturbi that were just phenomenal. And he made time for me, which I have to say is so unique. Many times, godparents, you get the card on your birthday with the $5 bill or the check in it. And then for the holidays, you get another card and there's another check in it. But my godfather, because he lived up the street from us, I was there whenever he was in town because he concertized a lot when I was little. But whenever he was in town, he'd have me come over and I would play a little piece for him. He'd tell me something, and then I'd meet some of his own cronies that are there, and it was fun. It was really fun. And then in the last few years of his life, when he started to slow down, he was more in town, the last 5, 7, 10 years. And I was there all the time, all the
Mm.
time. What great lessons I had.
When we're talking about your godfather, and that is sort of it's not as common and it's not as open a thing as it used to be, right? Like, oh, that's my godfather. Like, you almost have to say it, and almost the movie has kind of taken it over, and it's like, oh, that's kind of a scary thing. But how does and obviously it's not that thing, right? Like, it's when we had a lot more Catholicism in our lives, when it was a lot more normal to have someone there to be an actual present person, not this fail-safe thing. A godfather really could be a mentor in your life, like almost a super uncle. So how does he become your godfather? What's the story? Who picked him? Which parent decided that? And then, yeah, I mean, not just those things, but this is also a busy man. I mean, he's got to be on the road. When the studio calls, he's going to run down. He's going to play all night, and then you have a kid's schedule, and so he's probably in bed a lot of the day. So how does all this come to pass?
Well, that's really interesting that you asked that question. And, my godfather, he was on the road. He performed 150 to 200 concerts a year. Then maybe it was 100 concerts and then a little bit less. But, I'm so fortunate because I did not pick my godfather. My
Mm,
parents did not pick my godfather. Uh, his sister, Amparo Iturbi, who was my first piano teacher, who also lived literally across the street from us, uh, she kept talking about me to him. And, he's like, oh, another child who's playing gosh knows what,
right.
Florlise or something, which I never learned to play. But he was very intrigued by what his sister had to say because of that strong upbringing that we were just chatting about, that Noopy,
Mm.
Rosemary's daughter, was talking about. And so she was very into that. She had that upbringing. And so she could appreciate that when uh, my mother took me to see her for the first time, to see if she would be interested in teaching me piano lessons. It's very innocent when you think about it. Uh, Amparo Iturbi, which I called always Miss Iturbi, she was so sweet. She made the comment, well, that's so nice of you to walk over here and introduce yourselves to my mother, she said. But my youngest piano student is 25 years old and is a junior critic of the Los Angeles Times. My other students are all professionals, attorneys, CPAs, doctors, judges, politicians. And she said they all studied piano when they were little, had to put it aside as they developed their career and their professions, and now have come back to it. Why would I want to teach a 5-year-old? But as
Right.
my mother was chatting with her, Miss Iturbi recognized that I sat still, I didn't fidget, I didn't interrupt, I didn't look around. I was very calm and very focused. And I guess my mother was a very good at this. My mother talked her into at least trying just for, a few lessons, see how it worked. And
Yeah.
so Mr. Turby agreed. And from that, it went to a few months. Then it went to 6 months. And then after that, I was a member of the family. And my godfather came into the picture at that time because he wanted to see, who's this little girl that his sister keeps talking about? Who's this child? And so I played a few notes and then sat perfectly still again. I drank my glass of milk and ate my cookies while the adults were talking. And every time he came into town from that point on, he made it a point to hear me play a piece, have a little conversation, and one thing led to another.
It's that's great to hear because it's like he picks you as the person that he wants, and it's not hard to look back and go, he doesn't quite touch, but he almost touches Tchaikovsky's life. Rachmaninoff is alive for a lot of his life, and these people are his peers, right? Like even though Tchaikovsky dies right before he's born, his music is still young when he's young. It's relevant music in his ears as someone who plays the piano.
I like that
And
you said that, Pete. I
yeah,
really do.
yeah, I mean, it's fresh music. Like this is stuff that isn't classical at that point, right? It's like, oh yeah, that's from Tchaikovsky. He died young, and so you're playing it like this is the master's work, and then yeah, Rachmaninoff is alive. I mean,
Well, and
Shostakovich is
Rachmaninoff
alive.
actually, yes, and he lived in Beverly Hills for a time. And I know my godfather and Rachmaninoff, they got together.
Yeah. See, yeah, and so I guess the line I'm drawing is from Rachmaninoff to your godfather, right over to you. You know, he
Well,
doesn't have to do that, right? He doesn't have to make that connection, but he took the time to pass this thing. And look, I'm not saying he's giving the torch to you and expecting you to go and become a concert pianist or anything, but he doesn't have to give you that time. But he did choose you in part because of whatever your demeanor or something. Is it because you were this calm natured kid that would sit there and drink her cookies and or drink her milk and eat her cookies and play a small piece on the piano, or is it something else? I mean, can you attribute it to anything else besides just your guys' commonality in music?
well, we got along really well, and I adored him.
Hmm.
And if he told me jump, I would jump how high. I was
Yeah.
a wonderful child, I mean, it's, again, because of my upbringing. And children, we sense things. So, without me recognizing it, I sensed a goodness in my godfather and I sensed a goodness in my godmother. And, I trusted them implicitly. And, And when you go back to that, it's very rare that you meet people like that in your lives. They always tell you can pick your friends, but you can't pick your relatives. Well, in this instance, usually your families pick who the godparents are going to be. But in this instance, I'm so fortunate that Jose Iturbi stepped forward. And it was a very big honor. I didn't know it at the time. I just knew Padrino, is my godfather, and that's
Yeah.
that. And I knew he was, important. And I knew he had a lot of interesting people coming to his house. But it's kind of fun because I have to say, you talked about the fact that with all of his concerts and everything and performing and films and whatnot, he was busy all night long. Well, he actually was. He was very nocturnal. You
Right.
hit the nail on the head when you said this a little while ago. And he
Yeah.
would wake up at 4 in the afternoon, and I would come over around 5 o'clock, and I would play a little piece for him. And he would make comments, and we would just, and sometimes he'd push me off the bench and show me how it should be done. And he would play it for me. And then sometimes there was a very serious lesson. And then ultimately, his cronies, his buddies would come over, and they would have drinks and they'd play cards. And in those days, everyone smoked a cigar, a cigarette, or a pipe. My godfather smoked a pipe.
Mm.
And I giggled because I used to love the fact that he would wear, what do you call them, those shirts with four pockets, the guayaveras,
Hmm.
patch pockets in front, and one pocket had smoking tobacco, another pocket had his pipe, another pocket had his pipe tools, and then the other pocket had a Kleenex or a handkerchief.
Yeah.
So I thought, oh, this is so neat. Oh, all these tools and all these gadgets. My dad smoked a cigarette. All he did was, pull the cigarette out of the pack, and then, you know, uh, is it possible we can take a break for just a moment?
I mean, we're live, so we
We're live.
could. I can vamp if you need to go grab a glass of water or something.
No, I have got an important phone call that I must take.
You take your phone call. I'll fill the time. I'll talk to
Okay,
everybody for a minute.
thanks.
Okay. But go off camera or I'll put you on mute. Okay. You're good. All right. So I'm going to fill the time right here, everybody. How y'all doing? This is Pete from the Break It Down Show. If you happen to be watching this during this break in the action, here's what I'm going to ask you to do. The best way to support the show is to go to the PayPal link. It's scrolling across the bottom, right down there. That's the best way to support the show. It goes directly into the show. Well, here's what I do. I either buy ads with it, I fund the podcast part of the show with it, I buy equipment with it. Look, I've got this camera. I need to buy another one because I'm upgrading the cameras. How am I upgrading the cameras? Well, through the PayPal link. And that's how I do it. I also do these professional interviews that I do. So the PayPal link money helps me fund the show. So ads, PR, pushing the podcast out. And so these are the things that I do. It is a small ask. I don't want you to do much. When people say like, hey, you should sign up for Patreon. Hey, I don't need Patreon. I just need you and me. We'll do a deal. Go to the PayPal account. So you can go to breakitdownshow.com. There's a PayPal link right up on top. Pop that button right there. And then that will give you the ability to put in a small amount each month. That's my ask. If you want to do anything, and I rarely ask for this, it's always great when you guys do it. How do you help? Go to the PayPal link, and that is the best way to help. Let's see. What else can I tell you about? So one of the things that we've been working on are we've been examining a lot of the Ukrainian Russian conflict. There's a lot of stuff on there. When you see those videos come by, watch them. Watch them. Hit the like button. That lets YouTube know you like them. Anytime you see our stuff, that's a good way to help the show. And I guess another thing that I would say is just a lot of stuff going on behind the scenes, stuff that's been in development for a while. That's really, really, really big news, but is nothing that I can tell you about yet. And it's all like it looks like it's growing and happening. You never know. But there's a lot of exciting stuff that's happening that maybe I'll be able to talk about in the next 90 days, but maybe not. We'll see. But there's a lot of good things, and a lot of that stuff is fueled by you all who've been helping the show grow for years and years. We're at our 10th anniversary, if you can believe that, and actually over 10 years if you look at the For those who don't know, we started as the Midweek Mash, John and I, with Nico. And we used to do this show on community radio. That's where we started. And then we slid over to the podcast side. And so now we are 10 years in. Can you believe it? Really, kind of today is sort of the unofficial, official anniversary of that. So 10 years, 1,500 plus episodes. And no shit, like as we hit 10 years, things started changing for us in terms of the size and scope of the show. The show's getting bigger. We have a lot of subscribers. You will see hopefully some bigger projects coming out with our logo attached to it. So we'll see how it goes. If you guys have questions right now, while we're letting Donelle do her work, we will answer any questions. Hey, look at this. Here's Hal checking in. What a great guest speaker on your show today, Pete. Serious history. Yes, I totally agree, and I cannot wait to ask her this question that I have on the tip of my tongue right there. I'm about to do that. One of the things I'm going to go do here soon is I'm going to spend some time in some other places. One of those places might be London next later this month. Oh, and we got Donelle back. Okay, let's bring her back in. Donelle, I have a great question for you. Because your godfather is of Spanish ethnicity and about the same age, I'm going to take a stab in the dark, and I have no notes to confirm this, but I'm going to assume he had some familiarity with his brother Pablo Picasso, because these guys are from the same country and had about the same time frame when they were both alive. So did he have any relationship with Pablo at all?
I think that they did. I mean, I know that they did. I was not involved in it, needless to say. But right. Yes, definitely. And my godfather was a great art connoisseur and loved also not only contemporary artists, but he loved contemporary composers. So Albéniz, Granados. He was actually buddies with all of them, and he made a point of performing their pieces to popularize them. I mean, he, as we talked about before, he was a rock star, but so to the point that I think he could have played anything and people would have been excited. So it was his opportunity to expose the audience to new music, whether it was Debussy, it's Ravel. I mean, all these great contemporary artists. Sure. He got to know them because when he was at the Paris Music Conservatory, that was something to think about and something to learn. So he was a great proponent of classical music, more than the old masters, but the young artists and the young composers, bringing contemporary classical music. And as we talked about momentarily, it's about that crossover. He was so comfortable with crossing over and playing jazz, playing popular music, from the Great American Songbook. And, it meant nothing to him that he would all of a sudden, accompany Judy Garland.
Yeah.
Accompany Frank Sinatra. And in fact, that's how I first met Frank Sinatra. I was like 7 or 8 years old, and I was at Jose Iturbi's home, and the men came over as usual for their afternoon card game and drinks and smoking. And they all stopped their drinking and card playing, put their cigars and cigarettes down and piped down. And I remember I was going to play, I was very young, I was about 7 years old or so, 8 years old. I was going to play a small little piece, a Rameau piece, like 3 lines long, probably took all of 23 seconds. And I don't even think a half a minute, frankly. And I played, and all the men, they'd put their drinks and pipes down, and they're just all clapping. They just thought that was so nice. And then I came over to the table, their card table where they were playing. And I didn't realize, because I didn't know that at the time, but my godfather had trained me to walk around the card table. And if I saw a king, I knew what to do. If I saw a queen, I knew what to do. If I saw, something that had a heart in it, I would touch my heart, I didn't know.
That's great.
But, these men, they were having fun, they never took themselves seriously because they were so serious day long, doing their professional, doing what everyone loved for them to do.
It's amazing. Yeah. And I didn't even, I went for Picasso, but I could have said Dolly, and then yet you're right. Like if you go to
And
any
Dolly
of,
too.
yeah, right,
Salvador
right,
Dali, my goodness.
yeah. And if you go to school in Paris and you study the arts or you hang out in any of those places, all of those guys, he's from that era. Like, he's he's hanging out with F. Scott Fitzgerald. Like he knows these guys. He knows Hemingway. They're from that time. And whether or not they hung out together or not, they are the artists from that time. They were all 20 years old around the same time and figuring it all out. It's just amazing. So when you run
Well,
something
but I
like
just want to say one thing when you were talking
please,
about that. I found that so interesting because that absolutely is the way that it was. My godfather, when he was going to the Paris Music Conservatory, he received a scholarship, and the city of Valencia had pooled their money together, and he was going to go. And only did they realize when he got there that it took all of the scholarship money to get him there.
right,
Luckily, he was enrolled in the Paris Music Conservatory, but he had no place to stay and nowhere to eat. But my godfather, he was so used to working and playing piano for a living already. As a child, he used to play piano in the silent movie houses. And
right,
his father would bring him his lunch or dinner. And between things that were up on the screen, and, in my godfather's day, silent movie theaters, they just constantly played. There might have been a 5 or 10 minute downtime, but they just repeated over and over and over. So he would have a quick meal in between, or when there was a moment in the film that there was no piano playing. But
right.
so when my godfather got to Paris and all of a sudden needed to find a place to stay and this and that, he thought, I know what I'm going to do. I've done this before. Not go to a silent movie theater because there's no place to sleep. I'm going to a cafe because then I can get food too.
Yeah,
And so
right.
he offered his services, and he played live piano in the cafes. Developed quite a following. In fact, increased the cafes people coming to have a light bite to eat. But he stayed in the workroom in the back. They had a
Yeah.
cook for him, and he could eat all the food. And probably in those days it was leftovers. Who knows? But that is exactly where he met so many of the up and coming greats of the time, all of the great contemporary artists who were just honing their craft at the time. They were all honing their craft at the time, and they all became very friendly and got to know each other. Pete, you were just spot on with that.
And I'm not done. I'm not done because there are so many artists from that era and so many genres that were born in the 20th century. And so another peer of his, and they're almost the same age. He didn't live quite as long, but in that era, you only lived as long as you lived. But Jelly Roll Morton, he's a guy who starts off in Louisiana, in New Orleans, the home of the blues, where the blues, he is one of the first guys to play the blues. Where did he figure it out? Well, all of these guys that would go down the river and work, they'd get to New Orleans and they're like, here's your money, kid. And what do? You go to the places where the parties are happening, whorehouses, places where you drink. And what do you have there? You got a guy like Jelly Roll Morton, who's young and can play the hell out of the piano. And so he is one of the first people just like, we're going to learn to play these blues. And so the blues was like sacre blue, not like, oh no, I lost my lady. It's like, oh no, there's a lady over there. No. And so this guy ends up being one of the very first hyper talented, very first players. This is before they could even record music. And where does he end up? He ends up in LA. He ends up in LA because that's where you send people like that. And he's buried up on a hill in LA. And you can stand over that guy's grave and think, man, this guy, he is incredible. He is incredible. And much like your godfather, if you don't know, you will never know about these people. For whatever reason, history just lost grasp on them, and I know because of what you do with your day job, there are so many people, and even like someone like we talked about Gene Kelly earlier, we're losing grasp on some of these people because they don't remain relevant because the future keeps going further away from them, And so when you think about people like your godfather and Jelly Roll Morton and even Dolly, Pablo Picasso's been dead 50 years basically now, right? And so it's hard to stay gone that long and relevant this in this day and age. So what are your thoughts on that when you like look at what you do in your day job and keeping the Hollywood legacy alive and everything? There are so many people that just there are just too many of them. I mean, right now Rock Hudson's back in the limelight because there's a couple of documentaries about him, right? But as soon as those are over, you only get so many of those shots, like the rekindling of who you were, and then it's gone, and not everybody even gets that.
Well, I think you're absolutely right. And I think that's part of our culture. We don't revere our past. We don't
Mm,
revere the older uh, citizens of the generations of the era. We're just always moving forward, just as you said, always moving forward, moving forward, moving forward. And at the Hollywood Museum, we love to celebrate more than 100 years of Hollywood theme, entertainment, whether it's originally in films, even some vaudeville, because some of the vaudeville stars became actors that we see on the big screen, and also television, and of course now the new digital platforms. And
right.
it's quite something to be able to constantly corral people. And when you start to chat about the folks from Once Upon a Time, uh, you see a glimmer of recognition. And a lot of times they'll tell you, oh, yes, like Jean Harlow. So, oh, yes, Jean Harlow. My mother really liked Jean Harlow, or my aunt really liked Jean Harlow, or my godmother really liked Jean Harlow, or my godfather loved Jean Harlow. And so it's fun when you start to chat about that. And the reality of all of this is that, would you believe Marilyn Monroe, when she was becoming just signed by 20th Century Fox, she came to where the museum is today, the Hollywood Museum. We're in the original Max Factor building, the
Mm,
Max Factor makeup studio, where Max Factor made all the movie stars look fabulous in his world famous blondes only room, redheads only room, where Lucille Ball got her red hair, brunettes and brownettes only room. And I find it so interesting because Marilyn was born a blonde, but like many natural blondes, by the time she was a teenager, her hair turned darker. And so she had been experimenting to lighten it and this and that with peroxide and all sorts of things. And it didn't really come out looking the blonde that we know her as. And it was Max Factor who gave it to her because when he met her, he said, so who's your favorite actress? And so she said, Jean Harlow. And he says, well, I gave her the blonde in this very room. She was always a blonde, but I heightened her blonde with this new color that I invented, platinum blonde. And so Marilyn said, I just love it. So he says, well, let me give you an updated version of it. Of course, I'm making it very simple, but that in a nutshell is what it was. And so that's how she did
yeah.
that. But, and I think about it with my godfather, his whole goal was to keep classical music relevant. And he used the idea and the concept when you were in motion pictures or you appeared on this new invention of television. And he would always perform. And everyone thought, why would you do that? And his concept was, I need the younger generations
Right.
to learn to like classical music. And so these fabulous MGM musicals of the 40s that Jose Iturbi performed in, well, if you look back, you see who he was. And my godfather had several requirements from the studio. And one was that he always play himself, Jose Iturbi. He always had to be a good guy. And he always had to play the piano and conduct an orchestra in the film. And he
Yeah.
felt with that, he would bring the younger generation into liking classical music or recognizing a melody, because a lot of the popular music of the day was a takeoff on a theme or a melody from classical music. So, I mean, I like what you're saying because you're really bringing it full circle. Because when my godfather would perform to sold out crowds, I mean, he had sold out concerts constantly, so much so that they would put another 100 to 150 to 200 seats, chairs on the stage when he was
Yeah.
performing solo. And these lucky people would get to sit on stage. And so he had a great following, and he even had Bobby Soxers follow him, if you can imagine such a thing. Of course, in those days, Pete, they didn't throw underwear on stage. They
Yeah.
threw a scented handkerchief or a flowers on stage. And
Right.
so it was
Yeah.
very tame next to today. But that's what was going on in the 40s and 50s,
Yeah.
30s, 40s, 50s, 60s. Quite fun when you think about it. How innocent.
Yeah.
But that was part of who he was, and I think, like you said, this part of history, unless you know it,
Hmm.
you won't know about it,
Yeah.
because with all the different movie studios, recording companies, any form of entertainment, they're more interested in what they're going to put out today than what was once upon a time.
Yeah, and it's interesting because obviously your godfather has this enormously successful recording career. He anybody today would want to be that successful, and so why isn't it still successful? And who does get the royalties from his stuff? I don't know if he left any kids behind or anything, but you know, is there a market there still? Elvis still makes money. There's all kinds of artists. I imagine Amy Winehouse still makes money. And so it's interesting when you think about when does an artist stop being relevant enough to the partner brand, Columbia, Sony, whoever it's going to be, where they would say, I'm not that worried about that anymore. Or it's like, no, like there's people that are going to continue to buy these things. These movies are still relevant. Their soundtracks are still relevant. It's interesting. And I keep saying this just because it's so fascinating to me. What I guess there's two things to say. Nupi was talking about how her mom never got paid for the Dick Van Dyke Show after 1968. That was it. That was the last time she ever got paid. And it seems amazing to us, but that's just how it was back then. And Gene Kelly, this icon of icons from the golden era of Hollywood, doesn't really get paid anymore. And Patricia, his wife, has to go to the studio and say, I'd like to create this thing with my husband's image, and they own more of his image than she does. It's mind blowing. And so when you think about what you have to do to create something with your godfather, do you own the rights, or who owns the rights, and how hard is it to monetize this, and how marketable is it, and how many people do you have to convince to do something like make this book that's going to be Grammy nominated and possibly win a Grammy? How hard is all this stuff to do and take to market?
Well, again, everything you have said is 100% correct. But in the case of this book, From Hollywood to the World, with the 16 CDs
Yeah.
that have been digitally remastered, uh, because it was Jose Iturbi, I believe. I mean, I don't, I don't think we had to go anywhere to do anything. Sony was on
Good.
board before I even came along.
Mm.
And so that's kind of an exciting situation. And when I say I, it's just being president of the Jose Iturbi Foundation and in control of all of the Jose Iturbi assets.
Mm. Okay. Okay. Yeah. What are your thoughts on AI and someone coming along and saying, we'd like to have Jose Iturbi create some new things? Because with AI, this is all possible now.
Well, that's a great question. And, we have got so many friends through the Hollywood Museum that are either, at this point in time, they're walking the picket line, whether they're writers,
Fair enough. Yeah.
writers, or they're with SAG-AFTRA. And my heart goes out to each and every one of them.
For sure.
It's a very difficult time. And, the museum, the Hollywood Museum, we are neutral. We are Switzerland.
Right.
But I really do hope that all sides of this come to, I guess you would call it a bargaining table. I'm not really sure, but would come to the table and would just do whatever the right thing needs to be. No one can walk away 100% happy. You can't. But if
Right.
everyone can be relatively comfortable and recognize what's important, I mean, it's so difficult because this is the story of David and Goliath. And it's very difficult and very disappointing to see. But I do believe that everything will be resolved. Sometimes it takes longer,
Yeah.
but it will get resolved.
Yeah. 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 The strike, boy, that's it's the industry has changed so much, and it's changing so fast. Not only do they have to catch up the industry, they've really got to get it ahead of the marketplace. And that is not an enviable position. And I saw this great social media post, and who knows if it's true? Like, we never know on these things, but Peter Frampton talks about one of his most famous songs getting like 55 million plays, and he gets a check for $1,300. And
Wow,
it's
I did
like,
not know that.
like, come on. I mean, this is Peter Frampton, and if 55 million plays and he only gets $1,300, something's not right. Something's not right. Like we've got to figure it out. And I'm not saying that the distributor is being unfair. I'm just saying that whatever we're doing, however we're evaluating that music, that doesn't seem fair to me. Maybe Spotify or whoever it is isn't making enough money, and that's all that there's there, and that's a fair cut. But maybe us as consumers need to go directly to Peter Frampton, and
And
spend our
maybe
money with
before
him.
we could not do that,
Yeah,
that was not
yeah,
out there.
right,
But
right,
but
right,
you're
right.
absolutely right. But there's all new ways of doing this, and as a result, with new ways come new methods. With
Yep.
new methods come new calculations, and that's what they have to all work on.
Yeah, yeah. I don't want to take too much of your time. I know you already have one important phone call and a couple other ones. What else do you want to cover before we go? This has been already so fascinating, and I feel like I'm so far behind on your Godfather's career, so I've got to go get myself a 16 volume CD set and start listening to some. And I'm a huge. I don't know if you know Dr. Bob, but Dr. Bob is one of my favorite people. He's a friend. He's been on the show a bunch of times, and he is my classical music impresario. So I've learned everything from him. But so I'm glad to go through the catalog and just enjoy. But what else do we need to know about your Godfather?
Well, my godfather was a very interesting man. Uh, he truly was a rock star before his time. And most people don't even know he piloted his own plane. He
Oh,
actually took his
that's
orchestra with
right.
him from
Yeah,
concert to concert. This is how they were able to, do all of this sometimes. And when he played solo, he had sometimes he would fly his own plane, or otherwise with TWA, he would go into the cockpit and sit in
yeah,
the co-pilot seat and have a good time as they were doing, transatlantic crossings to Europe from Los Angeles, from Hollywood.
that's
And
right.
so it's so interesting to see that different side of him. He even had a motorcycle with a sidecar that he drove during World War II. He was part of the war bonds. He helped the effort to be able to sell war bonds. And with his group, they sold more than $88 million of war bonds. And that's in the early 40s. Oh my goodness, that was amazing.
Right.
I think about it, he was a very well rounded individual, well rounded. And I think one of the most fun things is that people don't know is, of course, he was, I think, 5'6", 5'7". Uh, he had just fans galore. But what they didn't know was he was truly an athlete. He loved to box. And he boxed he had workouts, and he boxed because he felt that being a musician, to be at the height of his career, he needed to be in the best physical condition possible. And I guess that's how he was able to pick up and go from concert to concert to concert with very little downtime. And in those days, it wasn't so easy to get on a plane, whether it was your own plane or a commercial plane. It wasn't so easy to land. The roads weren't so good to the big cities, and to where you
Yeah.
needed to go. Nothing was quick. And my godfather and my godmother, what travels they had. And it's so wonderful because I think to myself, they had the best stories ever. And I think for all your listeners and viewers, when they think back on their own childhood, they can remember some of that from their own families. And those stories resonate with you for the rest of your life. So, this is one reason I loved putting this book together. It was so much fun. And
Yeah.
I'm just thrilled that everyone is going to have the opportunity to learn much more about Jose Iturbi and his sister, Amparo Iturbi.
Yeah. I love it. What a neat thing. I just looked up just while you were talking. Jelly Roll Morton and your Godfather are buried 16 miles apart. Like even now today, they're just that far apart. I don't know if they knew each other in their time. They had to know of each other though, because both those guys could
I'm
burn on
sure
the
that they
piano.
did. I'm sure
Yeah,
that they did. And I would almost guarantee you that they have met.
yeah, no, for sure. Because those guys that community is too small, and they're both too good at what they do. They absolutely, Look, they both play too late into the night. They both. There's no way. There's probably a recording with both of them on it somewhere because they both just they were on the road. Who knows? Maybe they were always on opposite coasts. But I wanted to say that. And the other thing I wanted to say is your your godfather flew his plane and his band around on a plane. We had Bruce Dickinson, the lead singer from Iron Maiden, who also was a commercial jet pilot. In addition, like he's like, I can't always just be in a band, and so he would fly internationally as a commercial jet pilot, as well as flying around the badged plane that for Iron Maiden, the band. And so there you go. We have two of those guys now, and he also was a fantastically successful and well-rounded person. So these guys are birds of a feather. And now I have to send an email to Bruce Dickinson to see if he's familiar with your godfather's catalog and life, because he's going to absolutely love that, because it's right up his alley. It's right up his alley to know about that. So there you go. If it's not already a connection, there's another connection.
Well, you know what they say, 6 degrees of separation.
That's right. That's right.
But in Hollywood, it's only 2 degrees.
Boy, I'm telling you. I mean, Noopy, you and Noopy know everybody, and you're right. It's like if it's 2, right? I was telling Noopy that my grandfather, he flew Hellcats in World War II, and he grew up in Inglewood. And Inglewood played Beverly Hills High. And Beverly Hills, the years when my father was this hyper successful sports athlete, like a 7-letter athlete.
Wow.
He was ridiculous. Betty White was in high school. And so their schools played each other. So for sure, he and Betty White, because, back then, what were you going to do? You went to the games, because what else were you going to do? So
that was entertainment.
Right. Yeah, exactly. They went to the same beaches. I'm not saying they knew each other, because we can't know that, but they were in the same buildings. All these people, they are that close to each other, just that close. It's crazy. Oh, and Jean Crane was in their class. So, and she was this big, back then she was a big star. She's been gone for a couple of decades now, but all these people, you're right. They all know each other. And Jean Crane was famous enough to be on Whose Line Is It? So like these are people that get nominated for Oscars, which she did. And you're right. They all know each other. They really do. So thank you so much for coming on. Anything else? I'm going to put the link up here for everybody. Go on Amazon. You can get that collection right there. The book, again, also Grammy nominated, and you guys, I hope you guys win both awards. It's fantastic. I love what you're doing. Keep the name alive, and we got to get together and talk about the Hollywood Museum as well. Anything in closing for me at all, Donelle?
Well, I've just had a wonderful time, and thank you for having the indulgence. I have to tell you, my cousin's granddaughter, who is coming to see me, got stranded in the airport and was in a panic. And she says, I'm going to lose my flight. What do I do? And I said, don't worry. And you met Steve earlier. Yep. And so Steve ultimately is now helping her.
That's right. Yeah.
Well, you and I are chit-chatting about Jose Iturbi, From Hollywood to the World. But truly, it's a collector's edition. These 16 CDs are just phenomenal. The music jumps right out at you.
I love it. All right. So I'm going to run these credits. I'm going to say goodbye to you. Hang on one second. Thank you, everybody, for watching. Hey, thanks for watching the show. I really appreciate it. Right here, you can subscribe. Please do that. It makes the show grow. Hit that notification bell so you know which incredible guest is coming up next. Down below is the PayPal link. You can put a small subscription in. That is an enormous help. All that money goes right back into the show. And then right up over here are the next episodes you should listen to, curated by yours